Everyone to another live. I'm your host Christopher Balkaran. Sorry, folks, my microphone camera is just my microphone cable is just needs some slack here. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all enjoying your week. It is now Tuesday, November 4th, and the federal government has just dropped the budget. So in this live, folks, I'm going to go through the budget a little bit. Perhaps not what you're used to. There's going to be discussion about what's not being said in the budget and what I'm picking up from it that points to a broader liberal crisis. And I say liberal both with a small L, what it means to be a liberal today, as well as for the Liberal Party, big L. Because I think a lot in this budget is actually not very liberal if we understand what liberal means today. But I also think that Mark Carney is reading the room a little bit better, perhaps, than his predecessor. And he's putting forward policy that is indeed more middle of the road than the previous government did. But before we get to all of that, and folks, trust me, I really do encourage you to let me know what you think. Leave a comment in the chat. Leave a comment on this video when it's posted. Let me know what I got right and what I got wrong, and your opinion as well. The reason I say that, just today, folks, I received an email from someone who had gone through one of my videos on the temporary foreign worker program, and this person sent me a very well thought through email about where they disagreed with me. I think they included timestamps, but they included like all of the points where they felt like I misrepresented some of the stats that I presented. And I love that. That means that you're taking the time to really hold me to account. I haven't replied to this person yet, but that's exactly what I'm trying to build here, a community of people who are unafraid to challenge each other on what our governments are doing. And for some reason in Canada, we've just never really been okay with that. We've just been like, well, you believe that, I believe this, and we're just never going to agree. We have to start really normalizing disagreement in this country. I'm telling you, I was talking with someone who had spent a lot of time in South Africa, and he had told me that when he was on a train in South Africa, across from him were four gentlemen sitting next to each other, and they were all debating politics. And they were like, you know what, I just don't agree with you on this. I don't agree with you on that. And it was so civil. And at the end, they just shook each other's hands and they all went their separate ways. And I thought, like, does that ever happen in Canada? Or do we just retrench when someone says something we disagree with? I know I used to, and now I'm much more comfortable sharing my opinion, even if someone doesn't like it, obviously respectfully. But all that to say, if you do have a comment for or against anything that I present, please share it in the comments below. Please don't hesitate to email me. I respond and I look at everything, and I'm really trying to build something here from the ground up that is truly organic, and is inclusive of all of you and all of your voices as well. The last public PSA I want to say before I start this live is I just finished my first digital product called the Clarity Method. It's a pay what you want. It's in the link below. Check it out. Again, I don't want to make this like there's a suggested price, but that's from the website. That's not my suggested price. But so pay whatever you want. It's not about the money to me. I just want to make sure that it's hitting the right tone. The Clarity Method is 7-step process that I have kind of fallen flat on my face sometimes, navigating really complex issues. And every time I'm presented with things, um, sometimes I realize that it's not rational thought that will win this argument. It's a deeper understanding of someone else's emotions and what they're going through, etc. And so I created the Clarity Method, a 7-step process, so that when you're presented with a big topic, say it's basic income, abortion, capital punishment, immigration, housing, and you're not totally sure how to make sense of the noise, and you're not sure like where to start in trying to establish your own opinion, the clarity method really does walk you through how to kind of suss out what people are saying, how they're presenting it, so that you can do your own research and figure out what you think as well. Often we find ourselves like trapped when uh, a situation is presented to ourselves, and we're just like automatically taking a side that we may not agree with. So the clarity method really helps kind of like slow down that thought process. And it also includes worksheets. So it's a pay what you can. Definitely click the link below. I would really encourage you to just download it. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Again, it's my first digital product, and I'm going to put out more, and I'm going to keep refining the clarity method. I might actually even do a video series for each of the steps because I believe in it so much. So check that out. That's my last PSA. So let's get into the federal government's budget 2025. Folks, before I get into the points I want to raise, we got to remember something, and that is this is Mark Carney's first budget out of the gate. And my thought about Mark Carney is, and I don't mean to make this like rude or condescending to Liberal Party supporters, but we have to acknowledge that he's kind of like for the Liberals, the adult in the room from the previous administration or the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, I think in many ways, he put forward policies that weren't really backed by enough data and evidence, and it wasn't clear to so many Canadians, including Liberals, like what the plan is here. Mark Carney just came back from China, and he said, he's trying to repair the relationships. It's on the way forward because we remember Trudeau's relationship with Xi Jinping, which was not good at all. And I think Trudeau, he might have been well intentioned at some times during his tenure as prime minister, but when it came down to diplomacy and understanding the room and understanding how to work with world leaders, some of the most powerful ones, I often found him like virtue signaling at the most inappropriate times. And I just thought that that was very detrimental to Canada's kind of reputation internationally. And interestingly enough, when it comes to Mark Carney, we're just not hearing any virtue signaling by him at all. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have his flaws, which we'll get into in this budget, because there's some things in this budget that I'm sure you probably won't be hearing from the media tonight when you're looking at the results of the budget. Okay, so let me get into a few things that I really want to chat with you about because I think this is actually really, really interesting. The first thing I really want to chat about, and it's on brand with everything that I've been talking about, immigration. So, temporary foreign workers in this budget will be reduced by approximately 50% from over 600,000 to somewhere in the 300,000s. Um, that's pretty massive. International students will be reduced by about 60%. I believe that's over a few years. Permanent resident cap is lowered to 380,000. And the new goal now is to keep temporary residents under 5% um, until 2027. Sorry, just getting a message there. And that to me is a major pivot. Now, it could just be that so many Canadians were sounding the alarm. Maybe, just maybe, someone caught wind of my videos or my Instagram where I went into more detail about the temporary foreign worker program. But regardless, when it comes to the Liberal Party, uh, this is unprecedented and unexpected. Had this been anyone else, I think there would have been a lot of media coverage about this from a visible minority lens, a very identity politics driven lens. But the Liberals are doing this in direct response to what I think Canadians have all been saying in unison, which is the temporary foreign worker program. is complete madness right now. There's a lot going on. And I think that's something we really need to, again, dive into more and more of an issue of. So the housing crunch, rent inflation, and college overcrowding, these are real pressures. So the fact that the Liberal Party is doing this is also really interesting. Um, I just want to also mention that while we're seeing this reduction in temporary foreign workers, I didn't see mention in this budget of the International Mobility Program. So while the temporary foreign worker program contributes a few 100,000 people into our country, remember it's the International Mobility Program that since 2021, 2020, yeah, 2021, it has allowed millions of applicants into Canada. And so it could just be that the temporary foreign worker program is being reduced, but the international mobility program may be increased. I don't know that for a fact, but I imagine that may be the case. The reason I say that, 33,000 temporary work permit holders will now be converted to permanent residents in 2026, 2027. Um, so it's not like we're reducing all these TFWs and suddenly the issues of housing and others will suddenly disappear. I don't think that's going to happen. Here's something else that we should really be thinking about because I think this is also really important. Now, on the student reduction, permanent residents reduced, international student visas will be down by 60%. I've mentioned this on previous videos. Colleges and universities across Canada are so dependent on international students. There's one college in Timmins, Ontario, I believe, which is like 98% of their uh, revenue comes from international students. So the reduction in international students is actually quite interesting, given that I've documented this before, that college and university presidents may be petitioning the government for more international students. So for the government to reduce international students is actually a big deal. It's a big deal because that means the government is trying to respond to the issues that they're hearing from everyday Canadians. And so while I had the inclination that maybe it's college and university presidents pressuring the government to allow more international students into Canada because they pay international student tuition, they contribute more to the universities and colleges' bottom line than domestic. And also, according to the Conservatives' Global Skills Strategy of 2014, international students en masse contribute billions to our economy. So I thought to myself, okay, well then clearly there's there's a group, lobbyist group that's influencing the government to allow more students in. But it's clear in this budget that the government's taking a much more hardline approach to this, and I'm curious to see how this is going to actually shake out. Because again, I could see a lot of pressure from from colleges and universities on the government to make sure that there's that pipeline. We also have to remember that Canadian colleges are actively marketing their programs and services in India, in the global south. This is being documented. And so I'll be curious to know what that means for them and our marketing efforts abroad to attract the best and the brightest. Now, I say all of this with a bit of an asterisk because I think Carney, and I could be wrong on this, but I think he's playing the long game. I think this is a temporary pause until he can ramp things up when the economy starts getting better, because the economy will. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there about the economy. I'm just here to say, I'm not 60 years old, 70 years old, but I've been through a few cycles already where people have said that the world is ending kind of thing. I remember vividly 15-ish years ago, there were all these news articles about the end of oil and oil is going to fall off and the world is over. I mean, it was just doom and gloom. And of course, our oil consumption has gone up dramatically since then. So all that to say, I know the economy goes in cycles. Right now, we're probably in some type of recession, um, but things will pick up. And I just want to reassure everyone out there, things will pick up. There will be a moment where cash will be more flush, people will have more spending, our salaries will increase to match or go ahead of inflation. Like there will be a lot of positive things coming out of a recession, and sometimes some of our investments will actually go up much higher because of the rebound. So just keep that in mind. That I think Carney also senses that too, that this will be a temporary blip, but by 2027, 2028, temporary foreign workers, others, those levels will start increasing again. So I think this is just a bit of a pause until until he can resume those efforts. However, as I've said before, I do think this is interesting that the Liberals are putting this forward. Yes, it's Carney reading the tea leaves and seeing what public sentiment is. But fundamentally, we think of immigration as a liberal construct. It was Pierre Trudeau who really emphasized our immigration policies, our multiculturalism policy. So to see these reductions, I think, some may say, well, it's not multiculturalism. We still have economic immigration. Yes, and yes, and yes, for sure. But when the government is saying we're reducing TFWs by 50%, international student visas by 60%. Let me just sink that in, let that sink in. Those are not nominal figures. Those are huge numbers. And I think if this were a conservative government, there would be a lot of play about them being like not in favor of immigration. The liberals are doing exactly that right now. And we really need to just let that sink in. It's a very, quote, conservative thing to do. But I think they're reading that Canadian sentiment is very unhappy with the level of temporary foreign workers and international students across the nation. Now, what do I think about that personally? Again, I think it's a pause until a rebound in 27, 28. So I do think it's a pause. I don't think it's a permanent thing because too much interest is at stake. Too much money is at stake. I've mentioned before that lobby groups are very active in this space, not only colleges and universities, but employers as well. And so I expect there to be a lot more about a pause so that in 27, 28 they can resume the numbers that were 24, 25, 26. Okay, so that's the first thing I really want to mention. It does challenge the idea of liberal supporting immigration, things like that. I wanted to also mention this is also really interesting. Foreign aid. Ottawa is cutting $2.7 billion in international assistance over 4 years, bringing aid to pre-pandemic levels. I wish I could read. So this is really interesting. And again, on when it comes to foreign aid, you think that again, this is a liberal thing. Lester B. Pearson, so many liberal prime ministers and the Liberal Party emphasized foreign aid. This was a thing for them. We were, peacekeepers, bridge builders. I posted this on my shorts. If you haven't checked out my short, I posted one. I think it was today or yesterday about what is Canada's national identity. Where in our history have we really uh, put a mark or a line in the sand, drawn a line in the sand, and said, as a country, we don't agree with this, period. And we take a hard stance in another direction. And the only thing I can think of is when Jean Chrétien stood up to the US and said that we're not going to support them in the invasion of Iraq. And the only reason I believe Jean Chrétien said that is because the United Nations didn't agree with the US invasion of Iraq. And so this points me back to like what is our country's national identity? Routinely we always hear in the news and we see in the news how like the Italian prime minister said this about the LGBTQ community, or the French president did this, or the German chancellor said this about whatever social or economic issue, or the UK prime minister said this. And when it comes to Canada, I feel like there's never been an issue that we just disagree with the rest of the world on, right? Like there's nothing we really disagree with the rest of the world on. If you really sit down and think about this, I mean, look at the big climate change stuff. Like we were all in on that. Like regardless of the KPIs and if this actually mattered and if it made sense, it's like we were all in on climate change. Like we put our whole cards, like we put our whole hand, our poker hand, all in. And then when it came to electric vehicles and adoption, we invested like crazy and still are in like battery plants and EV facilities, and like we invested so much, and now we see like waning demand for EVs, or like not as many people who are into it. When it comes to support for Ukraine, we're like putting our hands up first, being like, this is terrible. We're going to support Ukraine like nothing else. And again, when it comes to, and those are just some I can just think of right now. In May of this year, we signed a declaration with the WHO to allow the WHO to determine when pandemics are without Canada really saying anything. Like it just, I don't know, sometimes it just boggles my mind to think how much power we've given up to international organizations who are not elected by Canadians. And we take their policy ideas and we just kind of implement them. And so this goes on with like us being the helpers, peacekeepers, bridge builders. But it's interesting that the tone has quietly shifted to, as what the government says, modernizing international assistance. And so I think again, this is like very, very interesting because the government doesn't have to do something like this, but it very much is in keeping with what I see down south as make Canada great again, or from now on, it's Canada first. Less humanitarian aid for conflict zones like Sudan and potentially Gaza as well. Maybe fewer international vaccination or education programs. And remember under Trudeau, we put forward money for countries hit hardest by global warming. I mean, this was a whole thing. And this funding may actually now be reduced. So I just think that it's interesting that like we have shifted our stance as this peacekeeper, as this kind of country that is like all in when it comes to international cooperation and agreement, but quietly we're like reducing our foreign aid, which is really interesting. Just a couple things also to keep in mind. It's not clear to me exactly where the money is going, but it could be that countries, it may go to concessional trade, which is something in the budget, which allows countries to buy Canadian goods. So again, it's part of this whole like Canada first, um, kind of like s- Canada first type thesis or like theme that I'm getting from every single line of this budget. It's very like Canadian, it's not like international, which again is the Liberal Party is small L liberals at a crisis because globalization removed the nation state. Like it removed that. It kind of in a way amplified the voices of international NGOs. Because if, and I'm paraphrasing here, but if nation states were left to their own accord, they may not realize that they're part of a global community, and they may not recognize that some of the decisions they make in their countries affect the global community. So that's why we need to rein them in with these supranational bodies to monitor their climate change targets, to monitor their CO2 emissions, to make sure that they're supporting humanitarian efforts abroad. Excuse me, to make sure that they're, you know, uh, doing what they can to support Ukraine against the aggressor. Like that's what globalization did. It removed the self-interested nation state. And for a time, Canada, again, like I keep thinking of a poker table, but like we just put our whole hand in and said, yeah, we're all in on this like removing the nation state kind of thing. And now I'm seeing like the same party that put was all in favor of that is now retrenching on those same words. And this is not necessarily about making it political, but there is an identity here that small L liberals would have that are not necessarily being seen in the budget. Like if you voted for the liberals, did you vote for like these massive cuts? I don't know. It's a very interesting conversation that I think we should be having as Canadians. Um, So, and again, I think the government is understanding that Canadians are struggling right now and, affordability, housing, food prices, etc. These are real concerns. And if they don't address them meaningfully, Canadians will feel extremely out of like they'll feel even more upset with the government than they did before. So again, another major shift that I've seen in this budget. Some things that I wanted to chat about before I get into the last thing I wanted to chat about, um, which is like uh, a few interesting budget items on women and gender, which I'll get into, maid, etc. But this idea of who's going to support the budget. I think that there's going to be some party's going to support this budget because it's not a liberal budget. It is a very conservative budget, to put it lightly. Conservative-esque budget for a liberal. Let me just also, mention the federal civil service is going to be reduced relatively dramatically over the next few years under this budget. Now, I don't know if we should take these projections to be real or not, but let me see if I can share my screen. That's actually a good idea. I just had that chart up, so let me see if I can get it. Let's see. Civil service. I can't find it. Anyways, the federal the federal civil service is set to be cut quite dramatically. I wish I could find it. Um, but I think it's important that we. Oh, here it is. Whew, found it. Um, okay, let me share my screen. Very interesting. Uh, this is it. Okay, so you can see this. Let's see if I can zoom in. Right here, over the next 4 years, okay, chart 36, public service and Canadian population growth. So federal service population, public service population has grown from 100,000, I'm assuming that's 100,000, to just over 100. You see how they don't start it at 0? Long story short, the public service has outpaced the Canadian population. So they're saying now we're way too high and it's going to come down quite dramatically by 2029 back to 112,000. Um, so that is actually quite huge. That's a huge deal, because it signals that there is going to be a massive shift in the civil service right now. And I don't think the civil service has ever seen a shift like that ever before. Um, Unless it was 1995 with the federal government at the time. So the liberal government is going to shrink the bureaucracy quite dramatically. Dramatically might be a bit aggressive, but tens of thousands of jobs will no longer be in the civil service. Could be replaced by AI. It could be replaced by a bunch of things, but that's a very interesting move by this government. I didn't see that coming myself, at least not as drastically. And I know under Trudeau, there were cuts planned, and he had exceeded those cuts to the civil service. So, interestingly enough, again, a liberal party cutting the civil service, when I would argue the majority of the civil service or a strong majority has very liberal leaning views. And so very interested to see that as well. So what's the final thing I wanted to chat about? Law and order, and this is really interesting. The budget in 2025 funds 1,000 new RCMP officers, and 1,000 new CBSA officers, a new financial crimes agency, $1.7 billion enforcement push. There's an ambitious bail reform strategy to make bail laws stricter and sentencing much tougher for repeat offenders. And again, this is something that the Liberals had been promising for quite some time, but uh, now it's here. And again, I would expect this from a more conservative government. Before I end this, and this is something that I think all of us should be really interested in, there's a few things that we should also remind ourselves of. Nothing was expanded in these areas: childcare, dental care, pharmacare. The funding was reaffirmed, but nothing was expanded. No new funding for the disability benefit, no new funding for school food programs, no new funding for any of those things that were championed in by the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau. Also, no net new money for LGBTQ initiatives. And I believe the women and gender equality received 382 million. But I don't know if that's anything that's new. I think that's just ongoing. So very interesting on some of the social policy issues. It's just like we're staying the course. We're not increasing funding. And to me, I think this is Carney sending a very strong message to Justin Trudeau to say, "Your time is up, my time is now," like John Cena kind of thing, where he's like, "Hey, like that was then, this is now. This is not the priorities of this government." Okay, so I think as I read through this budget, and there's a lot more that we can get into, this budget, I think, is setting the government up for a bigger debate on these issues. But I just want to say to everyone here, it's narrowing the political. Oops, it's narrowing the political landscape. And what do I mean by that? A lot of the policies, the ideas that Justin Trudeau put forward are gone. They're nowhere in this budget. They're not reflected anywhere in this budget. They're not part of this budget. They're not part of the vision for the way forward for the Liberal Party. A lot of what you'll read in this budget, you would expect from the Conservatives. You'd expect temporary foreign worker cuts. You'd expect international foreign aid cuts. You'd expect towing the line on LGBTQ and other social issues. You'd expect bail reform. You'd expect those things from a conservative government. Now that we're getting that from a Liberal Party, sorry, Mike, it means that the political landscape is no longer like extreme left. It's now much more moderate. And I would argue on the right, it's pretty moderate, or like there's some on the right that are further right, but this budget removes, like, ideological wise, a lot of what Trudeau put forward, and that to me is a major, major signal, for the way forward. And so it kind of leaves the NDP in no man's land, maybe the only true left-leaning party, um, but I'd be curious to know what they think about this budget, because what I've described, I think, is what Canadians would want. Um, so I'm curious to know what the NDP would say about temporary foreign workers, international students, etc. Um, and I'm curious to know what the criticisms from the Conservatives will be on some of those issues, because they've really stolen from the Conservative playbook here. So I'm curious to know what you think. Leave a like, a comment below. Let me know what you think. And do you also think that the political landscape is shrinking in Canada? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks again, everyone. If you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends, and also check out the Clarity Method link in the description below. Thanks, everyone. I'll catch you in the next one.